This is a story about my colleague, who is called Nick. We are colleagues, but we are not very close. At the company, others are extremely harsh and disrespectful towards him. He is quiet and doesn't interact much with others. He rarely shares his thoughts and often takes the blame whenever he does something wrong or not right. My other colleagues don't like Nick. They think he is too weak, fragile, and unfriendly. Many people often speak ill of him behind his back. I have some sympathy for him because I find him pitiable. Everything started after the meeting ended, when our manager scolded Nick severely. I saw him enter the restroom, so I wanted to go and console him a bit. When I arrived, I heard swearing from inside, and it was Nick's voice. I opened the door slightly and looked in, and I saw a rather strange scene. Nick fiercely bit his own arm, his eyes filled with hatred. At that moment, I thought he was really scary, so it was best to stay away, and I didn't go inside. I told my colleague, John, about this issue, and he always believed that Nick appears weak on the outside but is actually very dangerous inside. On that day, when I was returning from work, I was watching TV when I received a text message, and it was from John. He said that our senior manager had just encountered an incident this afternoon. She was driving home when she had an accident on the way. Luckily, someone noticed she was injured and promptly took her to the hospital. The next day, in the company corridor, I was talking to my friend, and as I walked ahead, I bumped into Nick. Nick and John accidentally collided as they passed by each other. My friend may have intentionally caused this incident because he always harbored animosity towards Nick. To avoid any conflict, I quickly pulled my friend away. When I looked back at Nick, I saw him observing and looking at us with an intense gaze. I advised John not to provoke Nick, as people who are frequently oppressed are prone to extreme and unpredictable actions. After work that day, my colleague suggested that I visit the hospital to see the manager. We went to the hospital afterward and visited the manager, but due to the recent accident, she was still very scared and traumatized. We asked her about the cause of the accident because we couldn't understand how she could crash the car into the railing. After a while, she recounted the reason for the accident to us. That day, after work, she was driving home alone. While passing through a section of the road, suddenly a creature jumped out from the bushes on the side of the road. It leaped onto the car. That thing wasn't a dog or a cat. It looked somewhat like a monkey, but not quite. It also resembled a child, but wasn't a child either. It aggressively lunged and bit her. In a state of panic, the car crashed straight into the roadside barrier. After hearing what she recounted, my colleague and I looked at each other, our eyes expressing disbelief. However, no one knows specifically what she encountered or whether it was an illusion or not. My colleague dropped me off at the gate of my residential area and then returned. I was awakened suddenly in the middle of the night by a phone call. In a dazed state, I answered the call. It was from my colleague, John. John shouted frantically into the phone that there was a demon-like child trying to kill him. Not knowing what had happened, I hastily rushed out of the house and took a taxi to his place. I was also filled with fear, so I hurriedly knocked on the door and called out to John. His appearance startled me. He looked as if he had just been in a fight with someone, with scratches all over his body. Upon entering, I tried to calm him down and asked what had happened. John said a lot of things that I couldn't believe that day. In the evening, he prepared to go to bed. Then, in the middle of the night, he was suddenly awakened by the sound of a shattered window. He saw something rushing in, very similar to what my manager had described earlier. That thing pounced and scratched him. John had to fight with all his might and eventually threw it away. But it immediately lunged back and continued biting and tearing. My friend wanted to run outside because dealing with that thing was truly difficult. Attempts to chase it away were unsuccessful. When he ran out of the room, it seemed scared of something and fled at high speed. When he told me this, I instinctively glanced around the bedroom. Across from the bedroom, there was a statue of Guangong that he often worshipped. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't believe what he said, but after the incident with the manager and the scars on his body that couldn't be faked, I had no choice but to believe. He had numerous small bite marks on his body, as if bitten by a child or a small animal. I was afraid his wounds would get infected, so I quickly took him to the hospital for treatment. In the following days, both John and the manager had to take sick leave, and I had to continue with a lot of work. On that day, Nick seemed very happy and enthusiastic. When I looked into his eyes, I thought he might be related to the manager's accident and my friend's experience. I secretly followed Nick after work. He went to a supermarket, but I didn't dare to go inside. I just stood outside and waited. He bought a lot of things for children, including some snacks. I checked his background. He was a single person living alone. I began to suspect his motives for buying those items. I continued to follow Nick until he stopped. He seemed to be on guard against someone and turned around to look back. Luckily, I quickly hid in a corner. I knew Nick was suspicious that someone was following him. I didn't dare to continue following. Unfortunately, this matter is not yet resolved. Both the manager and my friend have quit their jobs after this accident. I still silently kept an eye on him, but I deliberately avoided him because I was afraid he would look at me with scrutinizing and hateful eyes. As for the creature that attacked the manager and my friend, I suspect Nick used Kumanthan to harm us, but because I didn't have the courage to investigate, this matter can only stop here.